Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining us this morning. From 1nvest, we really appreciate you offering your valuable time to come and join us and our colleagues here today as we launch our second annual 1nvest Think Forum. 1nvest was launched about 3 years ago, and from there, due to the support from yourselves, our valuable clients, we've only managed to grow from success to success. Today, we'll specifically cover how the index tracking industry has developed, touching on how you can use index products, unit trust, ETF, within your roles and supporting your clients in order to achieve their dreams. We've got a whole panel of speakers, local experts and international experts lined up for you. And I think we're quite privileged to have them here today for their valuable time as well, so that they can share their views and thoughts and journeys through life. To my colleagues, thank you very much, everybody, for putting this together. And please enjoy yourself for the day. If there's any questions, please feel free. This is an interactive session. It's not just a standing in front and talking to yourselves. It's meant to be interactive and very educational. Our first two sessions this morning will touch on the socio-economical developments in South Africa, as well as the intergenerational wealth and how you manage that for your clients as the transfer of wealth is occurring. As our first speaker, I'd like us to introduce you to Ndivhuho. She is an economist at STANLIB, and I think we'll learn a lot from her on her views on the socio-economical landscape in South Africa currently. Thank you very much.
Sorry. Thanks, Johan. I'm very honored to be here today. Unfortunately, my topic is going to be a bit of a downer. Specifically, I'll be looking at South Africa's current socio-economic landscape. And specifically, I'll actually be trying to determine whether South Africa is on a path to redemption or whether heading down the road of becoming a failed state. Now, when you think of these two concepts, sort of picture them on I guess sort of a scale. So on the one side of the scale, we have what you might call like a mecca of a state, right? It's an effectively run state that everybody loves being. Everybody's willing to pay their taxes because they get exactly what they need and what they want from their government and from their state. Now, on the other side of the scale, we have the exact opposite, right? We have a completely dysfunctional state, a state that isn't even able to provide the most basic of services to its citizens. Nobody wants to be there. Most people have left, and those who are still there are there because they have no other choice. They cannot get out. Now, what I'll try and unpack today is, where does South Africa sit on the spectrum? So are we closer to becoming a failed state? Are we closer to being completely dysfunctional? Or are we closer to being the mecca of all states? And even though, let's say we are closer to being a failed state, are we heading in the right direction? Are we heading further down this abyss, the bad side of the spectrum? Now, before we can actually decide if South Africa is a failed state and where it's sitting, we need to define what a failed state is. And unfortunately, there isn't a commonly understood or commonly accepted definition of a failed state, but everybody agrees they know it when they see it. And that's because there are two characteristics of a failed state that define a failed state, really. The first one is that the government or the state is incapable of providing the functions that are expected of government, including law and order, military defense, a stable economy for people to participate in, and the provision of your basic services like healthcare and education. And because they're incapable of doing this, it kind of leads to the second characteristics, where people have lost trust in that government. Now, once you have lost trust in your government, what it tends to lead to is increased civil violence, higher levels of crime, more corruption, infrastructure that's falling apart, and basically people are a law unto themselves at this point. Now, with that said, what actually, or how do nations fail? There are 8 characteristics, or 8 warning signs, I think, warning signs of a failing state, or that a state is heading towards failure. Now, these characteristics or warning signs can be divided into 2 blocks. They're either economic in nature or they're political in nature. I want you to search as an audience, look at these warning signs, and then take South Africa from 1994 till now. And you look at them and decide, out of all these 8, which one is applicable to South Africa? For example, for me, I think the most applicable right now, and easily most applicable for South Africa, is that there's high and transparent levels of inequality and poverty in South Africa. It's not really hard to see. If you just look at Santon and Alex, they sit really, really close to each other. So each side of the area can see what the other is going through. This kind of transparency sort of creates a lot of tension and a lot of anger, especially from the people who are living on the have-not side of it. So that's definitely something that is present in South Africa. Now, once you've read all of these and you've decided, okay, South Africa ticks this many, count the number of tick marks you've put on there. If you have 5 or more ticks that you think are present in South Africa, then you think that South Africa is clearly headed down the road of failure. It is basically no turning back if 5 of the warning signs are present in South Africa. Now, I know you tried to be as objective as possible. I didn't tell you to be, but hopefully you were. But I know there was still some level of subjectivity there, right? We love our country, or we're very angry about our country, so we will have subjectivity that creeps in. Luckily, we don't have to depend on your subjectivity to decide if South Africa is heading down this sort of road to failure. There is a global fragility index that is calculated or determined and, I guess, generated by internationally, where they use a number of methodologies, both sort of numeric in nature and research and analysis they take, where they determine a country's fragility score. Now, the higher your score is, the more fragile you are, and the lower it is, the less fragile you are. So you're trying to get to 0. Nobody gets to 0, but that's where we're trying to head as a country. As you can see, unfortunately for South Africa, our trend has been going in the wrong direction. We have consistently, since 2006, when this index was created, we've been heading in the wrong direction. There was some improvement between 2018 and 2021 or 2020, but that was short-lived, and in 2022, we had a deterioration, and it's hard to think that this is going to turn around this year, especially given all the developments that have been taking place in the first 2 months of the year. And if you take these scores and you rank them with the other countries, there are 179 countries that are included in this index. And if you rank all the countries based on these scores, you get sort of the ranking. You want to be as high as possible, sorry. So you want to be country number 179, the least fragile country. And you want to stay away from being country number 1. Unfortunately for South Africa, again, because of our score deteriorating, we've been heading down the wrong side of the rankings. We are now the 79th most fragile country in the world. And that is a bit concerning, because not too long ago, we're sitting in the 90s and the 100s in terms of our fragility ranking. But now we're sitting at 79. And the sad thing about South Africa is that in order to be considered to be like in the top 50 countries, so like the top 50 least fragile countries, you need to be ranked at either 90 or above. And South Africa hasn't been above 90 in a very long time. And the reason for this is because not only has South Africa been deteriorating over this time, and the deterioration has been quite clear, but other countries have been deteriorating at a slower pace. So we are sort of the winners in terms of deterioration. And those countries that are not deteriorating, that are actually improving over time, are also beating us. So this has led to this, I guess, significant deterioration since 2007, where it peaked. Now, if you take the countries and see where does South Africa sit in relation to other countries, who are the lowest, who are the highest, who are the best? And it's no surprise that the best are considered the Scandinavian countries, right? A lot of people can say your Finland, your Norway have some of the best states in the world, some of the best run governments. And it's not surprising that at the bottom, we have your war-torn countries, your countries that have a lot of violence, a lot of corruption, very high levels of poverty, and basically are considered dysfunctional. Your DRC is there, we have Zimbabwe there, we have Syria. And in terms of South Africa's peers, it's not, another thing that's not surprising is that South Africa is sitting around some of what you'd consider our emerging market peers. So we have Brazil close to us, we have Mexico, we have Thailand sitting around the same area that we're sitting, we have Russia and India there, which means even though our politics and the politics around each country is vastly different, our socio-economic landscape and where we are is vastly similar. There might be some changes over the years, but this group has always moved together over the years. Well, South Africa has obviously moved faster down the road, but it's always been sitting around this area in terms of our peers, if you will, in terms of fragility. Now, the last 3 graphs, I guess, showed you the direction that South Africa is heading. We are certainly not heading towards becoming a maker state. We are more heading towards sort of becoming a failing or a failed state in sort of based on this fragility index. But what it doesn't actually tell us is where are we at this point in time. So if you have the spectrum and there's a middle, are we this side of the sort of center or are we this side of the center? And although we are getting worse, it might be not as bad if we're on this side of the spectrum getting slightly worse towards that side, because then we're still sort of above 50. And in order to sort of determine that, so how fragile is South Africa, the fragility index actually does group countries based on their scores into sort of 10 categories or 10 ratings, ranging from very sustainable down to high alert. So you have your best countries at very sustainable, and you have your worst of worst countries on high alert. And this is an actually interesting measure, because even if you're last, let's say you're country number 1 out of all the countries, if your score is high enough, you could still be considered a stable country, right? But if your score is low enough, then you head further and further down into the reds and the orange and the yellow. And what you're trying to do is be at the greens and the blues. Now, if you look at this, where do you think South Africa actually sits? Are we more, so let's say we've deteriorated, sure, but are we still in the green area? Are we in the blue area? Unlikely. Or are we in the yellow or in the orange? Are we in the red even? If you look at the countries, and actually more importantly, where has South Africa moved from? So did we go from being dark green to being light green? Did we go from being blue to green? Or did we go from being yellow to being on high alert at sort of very red territory? Unfortunately, South Africa has gone from being considered a stable country. In 2006, we were talked about in the same way as you talk about Greece or the Seychelles or Botswana. And now in 2022, we are down being considered a elevated warning country. Now, it's not really necessarily a bad thing to be considered an elevated warning country. The vast majority of countries are sitting in that level. Emerging market countries tend to be sort of elevated warning in their nature because they're emerging market, they're developing, right? That's why you see a lot of the developed countries are in the blues and the greens, while developing countries are sitting down there with the yellows and the reds. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's the rate of deterioration that has taken place in the last 15 years. So we're considered stable. So we've been talked about along with other developed countries in 2006, and now we are down to elevate. And this only took 15 years, and this is not a very long time for something like this to happen. And the concerning thing is that what is going to happen in the next 15 years if nothing changes in South Africa, right? If the same trend keeps going, you could see South Africa moving from being elevated warning all the way down to being on alert. Now, when you're down on alert, you're being talked about in the same way as Lebanon and Venezuela. And it's not hard to see South Africa going in that direction because it's already done so, right? In the last 15 years. In the next 15 years, it can do it again. And in the next 25 years, it's quite possible that South Africa could end up on high alert. Now, by then, you're being talked about in the same way as Syria. And that for sure is considered a failing or a failed state by that point. And although 25 years seems like a long time to come, most of us in this room will probably still be alive by that time. And if nothing changes, it's hard to imagine South Africa not actually heading down this road. So I think maybe I sort of answered the question in terms of where South Africa currently sitting and the direction that it's taking, and it's a bit concerning. Now let's go back to South Africa's fragility score itself. These are the different criteria that are used to determine South Africa's fragility. As you can see, the higher the number, like I said, the worse off you are, and the lower the number, the better. The ones that are highest are your economy, your economic inequality, the demographics are sitting up there at the top. And if you actually look at the numbers from 2006 to now 2022, you actually see that the criteria, the indicator that deteriorated the most during that time was the economy, right? It went from a score of around 2.2 in 2006 and is now sitting at 8. And it's not surprising seeing that this happened because look at how economic growth has deteriorated. In 2006, we were sitting at 5% growth, even heading for 6% if you tried hard enough. And now it's going to be even hard for us to get to 1% growth. The SARB estimates that we're going to grow by 0.3% this year, and that's nowhere near what is needed to actually get the economy back on track. Unemployment, we worked quite hard. I mean, it was still pretty high, but we were going in the right direction in terms of reducing unemployment by 2007, 2008. But since then, it's been going in the wrong direction. Unemployment has increased. Poverty has increased. People's lives have actually gotten systematically worse over time. Now, with that said, the interesting thing, while most of these criteria deteriorated since 2006 and now, there are actually two criteria that improved over time. And the one will actually surprise you. The economic inequality one was actually an improvement. It wasn't much of an improvement. It went from like a score of 8.9 in 2006 is now sitting at 7.9. And it kind of shows that government has made efforts to try and reduce inequality by having your social payments, by trying to improve access to your basic services like water, electricity, by giving people some housing and allowing them to actually be able to find a place to stay as they go through their lives. But it's clearly it has not been enough. There's still a lot of work to be done, and government is not putting in the effort that is needed to actually arrest this problem. Now, if you take these criteria and put them in the same sort of rating as like being on a high alert or being more sustainable, you can see that the situation is quite concerning. The economic growth one and unemployment, the economic inequality are still sitting at alert level. Improvement, yes, but still sitting at an alert level in terms of economic inequality. And if you look at your social service delivery, it's also sitting at, if I look there, on high warning. Right? And I think we all understand why. Electricity, water supply, it's all a big issue that government is unable to provide the services that it needs to its citizens. And it's actually quite hard to see that moving more towards your yellow or your green. We're probably going to continue heading towards the alert level and high alert level in terms of social, service delivery in that sense. I guess if I need to give you guys some good news because it's seeming quite bad. But if you look at the graph, you see that there are 3 areas where South Africa is in the green, right? We're considered stable or highly stable, I guess. And the interesting one that I want to discuss is the human flight and brain drain criteria. There's been a lot of, like over the years, people have been saying, South Africans are leaving the country, people are emigrating, our talent is leaving, we are losing everybody who can actually fix this country because they're going to different countries. But I think it was overstated. This index shows that, yes, there has been some deterioration, people have left, but the vast majority of people have stayed. And that is something that we need to focus on. And we need to see that although it's concerning, we're still stable when it comes to brain drain. There's a lot of talent here and a lot of people who can help push this country in the right direction. Now, taking all this into consideration, we believe, and by we, it's me, I believe these are the risks that are present in South Africa. So these are like the most immediate risks. And the biggest one is the high level of unemployment and the high level of inequality and poverty in South Africa. That one issue sort of cascades into other issues. The lack of resources means government is unable to provide services as effectively. People are forced to live in informal settlements because they do not have access to affordable housing and they do not have access to the services that they need. So once you arrest the one problem, I think it'll be easier to solve the other problems and the risks that are present in South Africa. But these risks are the sort of immediate issues that South Africa is facing. And within the high unemployment, the real concern is actually the youth unemployment. Because when youth has nothing else to do, they're going to cause trouble. And that is something that you need to look out for. Now, I think sort of the stick that will break the camel's back in this instant is this. Right, the number of days of load shedding that we've had. I didn't include 2023, but I think we all know every day since the 1st of January, we've had load shedding. We are expected to continue to have load shedding, another 200 days of load shedding in 2023. We only had 75 in 2021. We even had less before that, but the issue has deteriorated. The infrastructure, generation, there's just issues, and this is not the only issue, right? Load shedding or electricity availability is not the only problem that we're facing. There's water constraint issues too. In Gauteng alone, the last couple of months, we've had issues with water shortages, water cuts, water disruptions, and it's not because our dams are running dry. Our dams are actually quite fine. We've had a lot of rain. There's a lot of water available. It's just that the infrastructure, the water infrastructure, is failing us, and that failure, it was made worse by load shedding, but that failure has been happening over the years, and it's something that continues to take place. The deterioration is getting worse and worse. And the one reason why this is happening is because of this, right? The lack of fixed investment in the country. Since 2008, fixed investment has been on a downward trend. Government, your SOEs, and even the private sector are not investing in infrastructure or any fixed assets in the country. Now, it's not surprising that SOEs are not investing in this. They're barely able to run. They need to keep going to government to get bailouts. Government doesn't have the money either. They cannot, their focus is always on consumption expenditure. So making sure the wage bill is paid, making sure that your social payments are being paid. So there's very little left to actually invest in your infrastructure and make that commitment. Now, you have your private sector. Now, private sector has a lot of money. I mean, we have wealth managers, so clearly there's a lot of money going around. And they have that money, and it's all sitting in banks. If you go look at the deposits by corporates, you're going to see that it's at a highest level it's ever been. And that because corporates are uncertain, they're scared to invest their money, they want to park the money. They're not trying to get into fixed investment. They're not sure where the country's going to be in the next 5 years. They're not sure that their investment is actually going to yield any return or any meaningful return. So they've lost confidence, basically, in the country and in the ability of the country to actually produce any returns for them. So they also refuse to invest. And all these things lead to South Africa just becoming poorer. If you look at the GDP per capita, so if you take all the money that's in the country and divide it equally among the people in the country, it's been getting lower and lower over the years. It peaked in 2013, 2014, but since then it's been going downhill. And it was made worse by COVID, but the situation wasn't necessarily improving before that anyways. So people are getting poorer. There's not enough money to go around, and there's not much you can do. And when people are getting poorer, they're getting more desperate. And they can see the inequality building, getting worse and worse and worse. And that means they're getting more frustrated with the government and more frustrated with the people who they perceive to have the money and are not willing to share it. Now, if South Africa had to go down the road of becoming a failed state, this is the path that it would take. It'd be an economic, route where you start from ongoing weak economic performance because government is refusing to implement some of the key reforms that are needed, and then we get to increased levels of scarcity. There are less resources to go around. Government is unable to provide the services that they promised people because they don't have the money to actually provide that. People don't have money. People don't get the things that they expect from government. And what do? They protest, right? So the levels of social protest will increase. And at some point, the angrier people get and the more the issue is not resolved, the angrier and the more violent these protests can get. And they can get quite uncontrollable. And we think we saw a glimpse of that during the 2021 looting. And if that becomes widespread and uncontrolled, then we can have some serious issues. By that point, government will have no choice but to bring in the army, become violent, and declare a state of emergency. And once a government does that, and they do not arrest the issue of violence, they lose the legitimacy, people start looting at an even bigger scale, the currency collapses, and by that point, we might as well be called a failed state and pack things up and move somewhere else. I'm not saying this is going to happen. There are some good things. We are headed in certain areas. We are headed in the right direction. There are some reforms that we've seen government do. The most top of mind and the most visible one is the Energy Action Plan. It's been 6 months now, but I think as we go ahead with this year, we're going to see it become more clearer. We're going to get the private sector actually starting to build some of the projects that they've been talking about. The positive impact of it is not going to be felt maybe this year or even next year, but by 2025, if things keep going in this direction, we could get better electricity provision as long as the private sector keeps actively participating in this area. Another important area that I think is very important is that there's widespread acceptance, by government. And this is quite an important thing because it hasn't been the case for a very long time where they realize that they need public-private partnerships. They need the private sector to come and actually do this for them because they don't have the money, they barely have the skills. So they need to actually actively participate with the private sector to get things in the right direction. And this acceptance will go a long way in ensuring that some infrastructure development does take place with the help of the private sector. They cannot do it alone. And some of these reforms might seem very slow and they're very, minimal. I mean, the NPA is doing a lot of work in terms of prosecuting corruption. It's very slow. It's not the people we want to see, but it's actually happening. And I think that's heading in the right direction. We just need to see sort of the fruits of this labor that we are seeing taking place. So not everything is bad news. Not everything is great news, but we're not going to die. We're not going to, I don't think, personally, and maybe more of hope speaking, I don't think we're going to become a failing state. I don't think we're going to become a failed state as long as we keep going in this right direction. Thank you very much, guys.